September 30th, 2025 is the day paper Social Security checks stop. After that date, the Treasury stops issuing paper disbursements, and anyone still on paper faces payments that arrive late, arrive through a fallback nobody chose, or do not arrive at all. The stakes are narrow and specific. A recipient who ignores this does not lose the benefit. The money is still owed, but it can be stranded, delayed by weeks, or diverted through a costlier substitute at the exact moment a fixed-income household can least absorb a gap. Here is the strange part. This change was announced openly, in plain government language, months in advance. Yet the people it hurts most, the ones still holding a paper check, are the last to hear about it. If the notice was public, why did it miss them? This video traces the exact executive action, the real deadline versus the one going viral, and the single free step that keeps the money flowing. Because the viral headline says July 2026, and that mismatch is the first clue something is being missed. Before decoding the deadline, one number deserves attention. For most of the 20th century, the paper check was not the exception. It was the entire system. When Social Security began issuing monthly benefits in 1940, the mechanism was a printed Treasury check, mailed to a physical address, cashed at a bank or a corner store. That was the only way money moved from Washington to a retiree's kitchen table. Direct deposit did not exist. The banking rails that make electronic transfer routine today were decades from being built. For 60 years, the check held. It survived the arrival of computers, the spread of ATMs, the whole digital reordering of American money. And it survived for a reason that had nothing to do with technology and everything to do with trust. A check was tangible, it arrived in a hand. For a generation that remembered bank failures and had reason to distrust institutions holding their money invisibly, paper was not backwardness. It was control. Then came the turning point most recipients never registered. In 2010, the Treasury announced that new beneficiaries would be required to receive payments electronically starting in 2011. Existing recipients had until March 1, 2013 to switch. That was the first real attempt to end paper, a hard date, publicly set with a plan behind it. Anyone signing up for benefits after May 2011 got direct deposit or the Direct Express prepaid card. No paper option offered. On paper, the check was supposed to die in 2013. It didn't, and the reason it didn't is the whole story. Because the 2013 rule carved out exceptions. Recipients born before May 1, 1921, people in remote areas without reasonable bank access, individuals for whom electronic payment would impose a genuine hardship, a category applied for, granted, and quietly left open. The mandate had teeth for the future, but for a specific existing population, it left a door ajar. A small door, but an open one. The consequence unfolded slowly, invisibly, over a decade. The paper cohort shrank, but it never vanished. By the mid-2020s, the Treasury was still mailing hundreds of thousands of benefit checks each month, a fraction of total payments, but a very real number of very real households. That cohort had a distinct profile: older, on average, less likely to hold a traditional bank account, more likely to live where a branch is a long drive away. Precisely the people the exception was written to protect. Here is what that exception did that no one intended. It concentrated the paper population into the households least connected to the systems that would later announce its end. The recipients still on paper in 2024 were, by design, the ones hardest to reach with a digital notice, an email alert, a banner on a website they never visit. The 2013 phase-out did not fail. It succeeded almost completely, and the sliver it left behind became a group defined by its distance from the channels that carry government news. Which raises the timing question that the viral headlines are getting wrong. If the last serious attempt to kill paper set its deadline in 2013, and if a new action is now closing what 2013 left open, then the date that matters is not the one circulating online. The headlines point to July 2026. The Treasury's own action points somewhere else. The system had already tried to end paper once, in 2013. The exception it carved out, small, humane, and quietly permanent, is exactly the loophole now being closed. and the mechanism closing it did not wait until 2026. Start with the objection, because it is a fair one. A skeptical viewer, having heard September 30th, 2025, could reasonably say, headlines are unreliable, senior scare stories exaggerate, and half the viral posts circulating right now name July 2026, not 2025. So which is it? And if the government can't agree on its own date, why should anyone act at all? Take that objection seriously, because there is a real basis for it. July 2026 is not invented out of nothing. Federal transitions of this scale usually run in phases, and it is entirely normal for one agency to publish an operational milestone months or years after the policy trigger. Someone who saw a 2026 reference on a benefits forum or in a comment thread was not lying and was not confused for no reason. They were reading a downstream implementation date and mistaking it for the deadline that governs their own check. The steelman is straightforward. In a multi-step rollout, later dates exist. They are official, and a careful person could land on the wrong one honestly. Now the rebuttal, which turns on mechanism rather than on any single number. On March 25, 2025, an executive order titled Modernizing Payments to and from America's Bank Account directed the Treasury to stop issuing paper checks for federal disbursements, Social Security among them, and to transition to electronic payment. The order set the operative date, as soon as practicable, and no later than September 30, 2025. That is not a headline. That is the instrument itself, and it names the end of the federal government's fiscal year as the cutoff. Understand what that mechanism actually does, because this is where the mislabeled 2026 date collapses. The order does not schedule a debate about paper checks. It closes the exact door that 2013 left ajar. The hardship exception, the no bank carve-out, the small, permanent sliver, the March 2025 action folds them into a single directive, with one dominant deadline. After that date, the Treasury's default is electronic. Paper is no longer the fallback the system reaches for. It is the thing the system stops producing. When the mechanism and the headline disagree, the mechanism wins. The July 2026 references describe later administrative steps in a longer modernization, how remaining edge cases get handled, how legacy processes wind down. They are real. They are also not the date that determines whether a check gets printed this autumn. A recipient who waits for 2026 is planning around the cleanup crew, while the main event has already happened. This is the precise correction the viral coverage keeps getting wrong. The alarm is right, the calendar is not. The danger is not that the deadline is fake. The danger is that it is closer than the loudest posts admit, and closer deadlines punish the people who trusted the later number. Notice what the mechanism does not do, because overstating it would be its own kind of misinformation. September 30th, 2025 does not switch off anyone's benefit. The money is still owed, in full, on the same schedule. What the date ends is the paper delivery method. A recipient still on paper after it does not become ineligible. They become dependent on a fallback the Treasury now has to improvise for them, one payment at a time, slower, less certain, and never of their choosing. That is the deadline, sourced to the order that set it. It is real, it is 2025, and it is not the number going around. Which surfaces the harder problem. A dated cutoff only protects the people who receive the notice. The March order was published. The Federal Register carried it. But the paper cohort, by its very definition, sits farthest from the channels that carry that kind of news. Which means the people the deadline governs most are the ones least likely to have read a single word of it. So who, exactly, is still holding a paper check in 2025? And why did the notice designed to warn them sail straight past? Consider a composite that the Treasury's own demographics support. A woman in her early 80s, living in a rural county 2 counties away from the nearest bank branch. She has received Social Security the same way for 40 years. A check arrives around the 3rd of the month. She signs it. A neighbor drives her to the credit union in town and she cashes it. She does not have a checking account she uses. She has never enrolled in direct deposit because no one ever made her. And the 2013 hardship exception quietly let her stay exactly where she was. She does not own a smartphone. Her television is not connected to anything. Her mail is the government's primary line to her, and the March 2025 order did not arrive as a letter. It arrived as a Federal Register entry, a press item, a wave of online coverage she has no way to see. Multiply her by the scale of the cohort. In the mid-2020s, the Treasury was still mailing hundreds of thousands of benefit checks a month. Not all of those recipients look like her, but the paper population skews toward exactly her profile: older, unbanked or underbanked, geographically remote, disconnected from the digital channels that carried the announcement. Here is the lesson buried in that overlap, and it is uncomfortable. The people most exposed to this deadline are not exposed because they were careless. They are exposed because the same characteristics that kept them on paper: no bank account, no broadband, no daily contact with institutions, are the characteristics that place them furthest from any notice about paper ending. The exposure and the invisibility are not two separate problems. They are the same trait, viewed from two directions. A public announcement assumes a public that is reachable. It assumes email, or a bank that flags the change, or an adult child who reads the news and picks up the phone. Strip those away, and publicly announced becomes a technicality. The information exists. It simply never completes the journey to the household it was written for. This is why the macro question of this whole story, why the people it hurts most heard about it last, is not a paradox. It is a design outcome. The notice traveled through the exact channels the paper cohort was defined by its absence from. Notice who tends to catch it instead. The people who find this out early are already enrolled in direct deposit: the connected, the banked, the ones who did not need the warning. The warning reaches the protected and misses the exposed. That is the structural signature of this kind of displacement. The update is real, the update is fair on its face, and the update still lands hardest on whoever was already standing in the blind spot. Sit with that for a moment, because it changes how the rest of this story has to be read. The deadline is not the trap. Everyone reading a transcript like this one will almost certainly make it in time. The trap is the silence around a specific identifiable group, and the fact that being missed by the notice is only the first cost, not the largest one. Because when the paper check simply stops and no enrollment is on file, the recipient does not fall into nothing, they fall into a fallback. The Treasury has a mechanism for the unenrolled, and that mechanism is where the real price of doing nothing is hiding. When the paper check stops and no enrollment is on file, the recipient does not vanish from the rolls. They land in a fallback, and that fallback carries a price measured in days. Start with the number that matters most to a fixed-income household, not a dollar figure, but a gap. Direct deposit posts a benefit on the scheduled payment date, the same day every month, into an account already on file. The fallback for an unenrolled recipient is different. When the Treasury can no longer print a check and has no electronic instruction, the payment does not disperse on schedule. It waits. It routes through manual handling, a held payment, a reissue process, an eventual electronic substitute. The recipient must still be reached to set up. A payment that used to arrive on the 3rd can slip to the 2nd week or later, before anyone even knows why. For most people, a 2-week delay is an inconvenience. For a household where Social Security is the entire monthly income, it is a missed rent date, a bounced auto payment, a pharmacy that will not refill. The number that hides inside delay is not 14 days. It is the cascade of penalties, late fees, and overdraft charges that a single missing deposit sets off when there is no buffer behind it. Now recalculate, because the comparison is the whole point. Scenario 1, the recipient does nothing. The check stops, the payment enters the manual fallback. The money is still owed and eventually arrives, but on the Treasury's improvised timeline, not the household's. Meanwhile, some recipients in this position, anxious, cut off from the usual channel, become targets for the second cost, the imposter who calls offering to restore the payment for a fee or a bank number. The price of doing nothing is not zero. It is delay, plus exposure, plus the fees that delay triggers. Scenario 2. The recipient enrolls in direct deposit to a bank or credit union account. Cost to set up, nothing. The Treasury and the Social Security Administration charge no fee to establish electronic payment. The benefit posts on the scheduled date, in full, with no manual step between Washington and the account. The delay disappears. The fallback never activates. Scenario 3 exists precisely for the person. The first two scenarios seem to leave out the recipient with no bank account at all. That household does not have to open one. The Direct Express prepaid debit card is the legitimate no-bank option. The benefit loads onto the card each month, and the card works anywhere debit cards are accepted, with a fee structure disclosed up front and no requirement to walk into a branch. It was built for exactly the profile most exposed here: the unbanked, the remote, the person for whom just use direct deposit has always meant you need something you don't have. Hold the three side by side, and the arithmetic is stark. Two of the paths are free, scheduled, and certain. One is unscheduled, uncertain, and quietly expensive, and it is the one that activates automatically for anyone who does nothing. Doing nothing is not the neutral choice. It is the choice to be enrolled, by default, in the worst-priced option on the menu. If that reframing changes how urgent this feels, the like button is the quiet way to tell YouTube that more people managing a parent's benefits should see it. Which returns us to the group this whole story circles. The two free paths only help the recipients who know to choose them, and the people sitting inside the automatic fallback are, once again, the ones structurally invisible to the notice that would have told them a choice existed. The message meant to reach them is the message they were defined by their distance from. So two free, legitimate paths exist: direct deposit and direct express. And a third path, dangerous and expensive, is being engineered to look exactly like them. Two legitimate paths exist, they are free, and the exact action fits in 3 sentences. Enroll in direct deposit through the Social Security Administration, or set up the Direct Express card through the Treasury. That is the whole fix, and it is the reason the fear around this deadline is solvable in an afternoon. Be precise about the channels, because precision is the defense. Direct deposit is arranged directly with the Social Security Administration through a recipient's existing My Social Security account, by phone to SSA, or in person at a local field office with a bank routing number and account number. The Direct Express prepaid card, the no bank option, is arranged through the Treasury's own enrollment line, Go Direct, run by the government for exactly this transition. 2 destinations, both official, both cost nothing to set up, neither will ever reach out first demanding a fee. Now the contrast that makes this block matter. Everything just described is also, precisely, what the imposter imitates. Because the safest fix and the most dangerous scam can look identical at first glance. A caller says a paper check is about to stop, which is true. The caller offers to help enroll before the deadline, which sounds like the correct action. The caller asks for the bank account number, or a social security number, or a card number to verify, or a small processing fee to secure the payment. Every element mirrors the legitimate step. The urgency is real, the deadline is real, and that is exactly what makes the fraud effective. Imposter scams reliably surge around benefit rule changes because a genuine deadline supplies the pressure a scammer would otherwise have to manufacture. One detail separates them cleanly: the government's enrollment is always pulled by the recipient, never pushed at them. SSA and the Treasury do not cold call recipients to demand account numbers, do not charge a fee to enroll, and do not threaten that a benefit will be cut off in hours unless payment information is handed over on the spot. The real process has no urgency inside the phone call. The urgency lives in the calendar, not in a stranger's voice. The recipient initiates contact through a number they looked up themselves at SSA.gov or the Treasury's own site, never through a number that called them. The rule reduces to direction of contact. If the enrollment starts with the recipient reaching a known official channel, it is the fix. If it starts with someone reaching the recipient, applying pressure, and asking for numbers, it is the scam, regardless of how accurate the deadline they quote happens to be. This is where the 2 threads of the whole video finally touch. The people most exposed to the imposter are the same people most exposed to the deadline itself. Older, unbanked, remote, disconnected from the official channels, and therefore reachable only by whoever chooses to call. The legitimate notice traveled through channels they sit outside of. The scam call travels straight to the phone. The silence that kept them from the real warning is the same silence the fraud fills. That leaves one binary decision this video has been building toward: bank direct deposit or the Direct Express card. Which of the 2 free paths fits your situation or your parents better, and why? The comments are open. Everything in this story bends toward one uncomfortable symmetry, worth naming plainly before the final instruction. A public notice protects a public that can be reached. Strip away the bank, the broadband, the adult child who reads the news, and the word announced becomes a formality. The people the September 30th, 2025 deadline governs most closely are the people its announcement was structurally guaranteed to miss. That is not carelessness on their part. It is the exact trait, distance from institutions, that kept them on paper in the first place, viewed from the other side. So the macro question answers itself. If the change was announced openly, why are the people it hurts most the last to hear about it? Because the announcement traveled through the very channels those recipients were defined by their absence from. The notice and the exposure ran through the same pipe, in opposite directions. Publicity reached the already protected. Silence kept the exposed exactly where they were. Watch how that plays out in the negative, the case that proves the rule by failing to fit it. Picture the recipient who did hear early, banked, online, a benefits alert in the inbox, a bank that flagged the change. That person was never really at risk. They had a scheduled deposit already, or they enrolled in an afternoon and forgot about it. The warning found them precisely because they did not need it. The counterexample is instructive not because it is common, but because it is the mirror image of the danger. Whoever the notice reaches easily is whoever the deadline barely touches. The reach and the risk move in opposite directions, which is why the loudest coverage feels urgent to the people least in peril and stays inaudible to the ones who are. That inversion is the whole reason this video exists in the form it takes. Not to raise an alarm for the connected who will make the deadline without trying, but to convert a vague headline dread into one dated fact and one concrete act, and to route that act around the fraud engineered to imitate it. Here is the application, stripped to its smallest possible shape. If you, or a parent you help, still receive a paper Social Security check, do one thing this week. Initiate enrollment yourself through a channel you looked up. Direct deposit at the Social Security Administration or the Direct Express card through the Treasury's Go Direct line. Free, pulled by you, never pushed at you. That single act moves a household out of the automatic fallback and off the target list in the same motion. Sit with how small that action is against how large the consequence of skipping it can be. A benefit stranded for weeks, a fallback nobody chose, a scam call that quotes a real deadline. All of it dissolves the moment an enrollment sits on file. The deadline was never the trap. Inaction was. Which side of the two free paths fits your situation? Bank direct deposit or the Direct Express card, and what makes it the right one for you? That is the decision this whole story reduces to. This is education, not personalized advice. The rule is unforgiving of silence and generous with one small act. Take it while the calendar still leaves room. Wealth is built to last, but only when the payment that funds it keeps arriving.